All right, here we are yet again, another midpoint, season 4, episode 5, entitled First of His Name. There's some good things that happened in this episode, but a lot that we were kind of already expecting, Pat. Anything to say before we get started?
Yeah, I think the Talkin TV family is going to agree with me here that it's probably the last of his name as well.
As we come to see later on. All that more on tonight's episode of Talkin' Thrones. All right, another season, another midpoint, season 4, episode 5, entitled First of His Name. You know, the midpoints I always have a lot of fun with, because depending on the trajectory of what the season is attempting to accomplish, you can either have a kind of like an interesting midpoint, or you could have like a really gangbusters midpoint. But I think this is the first one where, because this season in particular is so backloaded, as far as I'm not kidding when I say the next 5 episodes after this episode each have a tremendous gangbusters event in it. So much so that it almost makes this episode come off as kind of lackluster, which doesn't make this a bad episode at all. But it definitely feels like, again, a lot of things happen in this episode that we kind of were already meant to expect, that were already kind of set up. And so it does take an air out of this episode when the 5 episodes that we have following this are Laws of Gods and Men, which is Tyrion's trial, Mockingbird, which is when Littlefinger kills Lysa, Mountain vs. the Viper, which, again, it's literally in the title, Watchers on the Wall, which is the Battle of the Wall, and then the finale, which has Tywin dying and the Hound falling off a cliff and everything. So, yeah, I mean, Pat, what are your thoughts on this episode going into it?
Yeah, I think this is totally like, when you're booking professional combat sports or something like that, you always have like the cool down match just before the main event. And I think that's what this is. This is a really good episode. It's something on paper that looks good. And then you watch it and it's like everything that came before is like super
awesome.
Hype. Everything that's coming after is super hype. This is like the, time to refresh your popcorn, time to go to the restroom. It's basically the good stuff happens and you don't really want to miss it. But at the same time, compared to what's coming next, this is your moment.
Right. Another interesting point also about this episode before we dive in is that Jaime Lannister, who again is, I would argue, is kind of the main character of this season. He's the character with whom a lot of the centralized action is revolving around as well. Not in this episode at all in its entirety. Also no Tyrion in this episode at all either. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Very centered on... Yeah,
could you even like an episode without Tyrion?
I know. How is that even possible? Yeah. Very centered on Cersei and Marjorie. Very centered on the stuff going on at the Eyrie. We get one brief check-in with Daenerys, and then the back half of this episode is dedicated primarily to the stuff going on at Craster's Keep, with a little, wrapping that whole arc up with a little bit of a check-in in the river, and with Brienne and then with Arya and them. So let's say we get into it.
Yeah, where do you want to start, man?
Well, I mean, let's start
plenty of jokes, plenty of serious things too.
Yeah, well, I don't get me wrong. I had a lot of jokes written down for this episode, but let's start right at the top. Again, it's the centerpiece of the episode. Again, Tommen getting crowned king immediately in the aftermath of Joffrey's death. Took a couple of episodes, but again, it opens up with the coronation. And as they say, Tommen Baratheon, first of his name, and again, like the actual coronation of itself, that's kind of like not really interesting. We kind of know exactly what happens, but I did like it. I thought, again, kicking off who I think again is one of the, like, as if this wasn't more evidence that this season is like Cersei Lannister's like crowning achievement, like acting wise, or at least the beginning of it. Like this episode, Cersei again is just getting dunks consistently throughout this entire season, and this episode is yet another display of that, where she has this really interesting back and forth with Marjorie off of the court. Well, first Marjorie's staring directly at Tom, and Tom flashes her a smile. Then you have one of those great Game of Thrones shots where the other figure steps into the camera view, and you just see Cersei, and she just has this look of absolute disgust on her face. Walks over and surprisingly almost makes like she's gonna make peace with Marjorie, and she's like, "Oh, hey,
Yeah, it's the most real conversation that the two of them have had up to this point, where it's like, listen, Joffrey's a nightmare. I know it was true. It's true.
Right.
And essentially it's like, hey, when you're a mother and you're looking at your firstborn child, it's like, that doesn't matter. It's like, I knew the things he was doing were horrific, and they scared me. But at the end of the day, it's like, you still love them. And, I think it's one of those things where it's a little bit relative, like Cersei's opening up to Marjorie, but at the same time, saying like, I might be speaking to you in this manner, I might be a little more open than usual, but we're still not necessarily on the same side. We're not necessarily, friends. If you look at it, she's talking about Tommen and sharing the responsibility of helping him, and a mother can't do it alone, and blah 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 blah. But ultimately, it's one of those things where it's a little underhanded what Cersei is saying to Marjorie.
Well, it's interesting because the entirety of this episode, I feel like, just revolves around, again, like, really breaking down Cersei Lannister as a character, which is that at the end of the day, she is a mother, first and foremost. That's kind of like this role that she always sees herself as. She's a queen, she's a wife, but she always kind of sees herself as this overprotective mother, first and foremost. She's always talking about her children, how much she loves them, how she's basically dedicated her entire life to protecting them and protecting them, even at the detriment of the Lannister legacy. And so I think that makes it so interesting, the fact that she is so willing to reach out to Marjorie, who is somebody who she has considered an enemy almost the moment since they locked eyes, just at the behest of protecting her last-born son. Joffrey's dead, Myrcella's leagues away in Dorne, and I think it's also like a good transition into obviously the Oberyn scene that comes after that fact. But I think that what's most interesting as well is the fact that I think that what's also super interesting here is the fact that she kind of like tries to bring up the idea to Marjorie about like potentially her, being the next queen immediately after Joffrey, when it's like everybody and their mother knows that Marjorie is obviously going to marry Tommen now that Joffrey's done. But it's like Cersei bringing up the idea here when obviously we know that she has been so against the idea of them getting further into bed and with Tyrells. I don't know. Is that her like trying to gain favor with Tommen? Is that her trying to flex more on Marjorie? Like, what do you think? Or do you think it's like actually coming from a place of genuine feeling before Marjorie again stupidly brings up the idea of, oh, how are we even going to be related once you marry Lors? I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, my take is the whole figuring out what our relation thing is kind of the goofiest thing ever. Mainly, it brings up the whole Loras issue, which is like for Cersei, she's traumatized. Robert Baratheon and being married to him, and basically just like sold by Tywin into this marriage just for power, just for positioning, and everything that came with it. It's one of those things that haunts her. So when Marjorie brings it up and brings the whole relationship stuff up, it just absolutely disgusts Cersei and changes her mind. And, I think everything that was happening before is just really saying that it's almost like, I guess it is extending the olive branch, right? We're two families. We have our own power. We need each other to rule these kingdoms. It's almost like Cersei's coming to a realization that like there has to be some sort of uneasy peace between the two families. I think it's exactly that. It's uneasy peace because any little thing, including remembering that she's going to be marrying Loras, that's a problem. So it basically makes that clear that the two families are coming together, that they're going to have to somehow, basically let the, water go over the dam and just kind of live with it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really walking on eggshells for the two of them.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a really trepidatious scene, and again, it continues kind of in the scene that she has with Tywin afterwards, where she's like, obviously she admits she doesn't trust the Tyrells, but again, like she's playing favor. She still knows that she has to like cozy up to Tywin, especially now that Tywin not only obviously Tywin really never had time for Tyrion, but now that Tywin has kind of like had his had it with Jamie as well. She's kind of like really trying to like make her as like, daddy's little girl kind of moment there. And he like even kind of attempts to comfort her. He's like, I know you don't like it. I didn't like your first husband, kept patting me on the back too much. I thought that was really funny. Just, admitting his disgust for Robert before admitting that, kind of the real reason why he's still so willing to, continue this alliance with the Tyrells, which is the fact that the Lannister name, it's kind of all they have left because they don't have any money left. He even says it. Their last gold mine ran dry. What is it, like a month ago, like 3 months ago, something like that. So they have no gold left in the name. So not only have they been borrowing the Iron Bank money from the Iron Bank and are heavily in debt to the crown, but the Lannister name is in debt as well. So as he makes it seem, is like you don't have to trust everyone to you don't have to trust everyone that you're in alliance with. You just have to make sure that it works to their advantage. But like, I don't know, like just this whole entire thing, because this is a thing that this is a nitpick that I kind of had when I first watched it originally. And I'm like, how is a man like Tywin Lannister, Again, biggest badass in the Seven Kingdoms, known for his ruthlessness, his cunning, his intelligence. How is a man like Tywin Lannister going to let the entire source of the Lannister name, which is gold, they can say all they want, armies, the name, whatever, but it's gold, and the fact that Lannisport sits on like one of the most profitable gold mines in the entire continent, let them go that heavily in debt to the Iron Bank and form an alliance with the Tyrells, of which they know the Tyrells are consistently attempting to undercut them. And now he's admitting such sensitive information like this. Like, I don't know. It feels like such a rookie mistake, and also something that feels totally out of character for a guy like Tywin.
Well, I think the fact is this information is kind of public, right? Because Tywin can go to the Iron Bank just like the Tyrells can, and so conversations are going to happen behind closed doors, and information is going to spread, and so it's not really like it behooves him to necessarily broadcast it, but also at the same time, it's something that is inevitable, right? It's going to get out, and so it's one of those things where I think in terms of going into debt, he did it so that he could win the war and put his family at the top of the Seven Kingdoms. And with that becomes the benefits, right? You're basically going to control all the richest families. They're going to pay some sort of taxation to you. You're going to have an immense position to really trade or control trade and benefit from trade. So the amount of wealth generation from leading the Seven Kingdoms that's bound to come for the Lannisters is basically an investment. So you're investing all this debt into getting the power, and then hoping that the return of holding King's Landing and the rest of the kingdoms is going to return enough to pay back and also fill your coffers for generations to come. So I think Tywin is pretty much, it's calculated risk, and it's all about, sort of his opportunity to seize that power. And, he's really, dealing with the mechanisms of finance, the mechanisms of people, the mechanisms of war, of scheming, like everything that's important in these times, he is sort of a master of. The only thing is he's not a master of fatherhood. And that's probably his undoing.
That literally becomes his undoing, as we see later on in this season. Yeah, he also, again, it behooves him, obviously, to, give Cersei a lesson on how actual banking works. And she's like, well, there has to be somebody we can reach out to in the Iron Bank. And he's like, and a temple is comprised of stones. One stone falls, and another one takes its place, and on it goes. That's how it works. I feel like this entire episode should be called Lannisters Acting Out of Character, because Cersei, besides, in addition to trying to play nice to Marjorie, also is trying to play nice to Oberyn, but possibly in an attempt to sway him more so to voting with her automatically on Tyrion's trial, and also the fact that she does miss Myrcella. It should also be called, again, Cersei missing her and going nuts over her kids just a little bit. But I don't know, like that whole Oberyn scene, it's really nice, it's really sweet, it's an interesting moment of bonding where they're kind of bonding over their like collective trauma. She's like, the gods, what a twisted joke it was, they made you a massive fighter, and and then they took your sister, and they made me, a queen or whatever, and then they took my son, and they kind of bond over their children. And he's like, your daughter's safe. We don't hurt little girls in Dorne. Again, a little bit of a flash forward to later on, obviously, with Ilaria when she ends up killing Myrcella and poisoning her. Cersei's
I think this particular scene is, it is Cersei with another plot and trying to be cunning. And the whole idea of this scene is for Mando to basically I'm sorry, that's another character he plays, but like Oberyn
crossing our show streams right now.
Yeah, it's a shameless plug, I guess. I don't know, but the fact is, Oberyn is he's just someone that's taking it in. He's listening to what Cersei has to say, and it's played where he's not really responding in the affirmative, right? He's sort of just like listening to her, saying the things he needs to say to continue the conversation. He's not like agreeing with her 100%. And so I think that's really the linchpin of this scene, is the fact that he's willing to have a conversation with her, listen to what she has to say. He's not really dismissing her in any way, but he's letting it linger. And the fact is he says his piece as well. And he's going to, in the next couple episodes, make some serious decisions. And I think this is one of the moments where, he's just kind of reviewing her, and Cersei's trying to get me to do X. So, why am I going to fall into the palm of my enemy's hands? And I think this is a nice little scene where as we watch it, we don't really know either way what he's thinking. I think it's really meant to lead us towards the fact that he's going to comply and be that third judge that really just seeks power and joins the Lannisters on the small council in terms of ruling the Seven Kingdoms. It could totally go that way at this point. And he gives us nothing in this sequence that would lead us to believe that he's in opposition, but at the same time, he's not giving us anything that would say he's not going to defy them and go against them and really steer into Tyrion's basically corner. And one of the things that's cool about this scene is he asks her straight out, do you really think that Tyrion did it? And she says yes. And I think Oberyn, has really expressed that he doesn't think that Tyrion has done it, or at least has sort of leaned in that direction. And so I think that's one of the opportunities that he's given Cersei to really, come clean and really kind of speak truth to power. And yet, she doesn't. She really is in that scheming mode. And I think that's going to really weigh in on Oberyn's decision in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, I agree. Oberyn, once again, a player who, again, knows exactly the pit of vipers, if you will, pun intended, that he has found himself in, and is playing the game, playing both sides, getting the best for him while also knowing how to play his opponents, obviously, until we see up until the end, where he unfortunately makes the wrong choice, lets his ego get a little bit of the better of him. Let's check in quick with Daenerys across the Narrows.
Oh, yeah, really quick. Yeah, everything happens in exposition.
Real quick. Just a big old exposition dump right here. But again, this is kind of like tying up her Myronese arc, at least as far as the books go. And there's a reason why we only get a couple more scenes with her throughout the rest of the season as far as her ruling. But it's mostly just catching her up. She's like, okay, Joffrey's dead. Daario took the Myronese navy. But unfortunately, Yunkai and Astapor have fallen without the Unsullied there to protect them, which I'm like, come on, kind of a little bit of a rookie mistake. You have 8,000 Unsullied. You're not going to leave a little garrison of them in Astapor and Yunkai in order to protect them. I mean, come on, like 10 Unsullied could do better with that, could take on, an entire army that, that the slavers end up sending their way. But it's a little more of an interesting dichotomy here. Once again, establish the thing that was established last season with the difference between Barristan and Jorah. Well, first off, obviously, Daario just kind of doing whatever he wants in Daenerys' name. There's like a little moment there where it's like, I didn't technically authorize you to take the Myronese navy, but hey, it's a lot of ships, it's kind of useful to me, you're gonna pass for now, for not following, for me not giving you a direct command. But brings up another interesting thing between Jorah and Barristan, where Barristan is like, yeah, we got the moves, we can make the move on Westeros, and Jorah is like, I don't necessarily know if that's a good idea. Once again, Jorah's definitely taken a backseat this season as far as like kind of his involvement within Daenerys' encampment. But again, he's still providing those sage words of wisdom that he has since his first introduction, which is, again, providing a lot of the common sense angle that a lot of more traditionalists like Barristan would be against. Where Barristan still thinks that if she goes to Westeros, the old houses will flock to her. And Jorah consistently reminds him, the old houses are only going to flock to whoever they think is going to win. And even though Daenerys has a really good chance on her side, it's still not completely proven, And I think Jorah knows that it's like, we still got to wait for the dragons to grow because we know that's going to be our linchpin. That's going to be our ace in the hole.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, Tom. And I'm going to jump in and just say that in this particular sequence, I think Jorah makes his point very subtly, and then she picks up on it and she sort of doubles down and agrees with him. And the whole point is that, look at the two previous slave cities that they freed and installed governors and councils and whatever, what have you. For the most part, they were overthrown easily. And the fact is, she's ruling multiple areas in Essos, and, she's failed. Basically, wherever she is, she has power, but her power doesn't extend beyond her army.
Right.
And I think that's something about leadership that she has to learn. And, it's definitely going to come into play when she gets to Westeros and has to rule the Seven Kingdoms. So, I think it's one of those things where she picks up on the idea that she has failed, even though they've seen all these successes and they have really moved the needle in the right direction. She's still growing as a leader, and she still needs really to, basically learn her craft as a queen and figure out how to rule a massive amount of people. And that's something that she's had a little bit of road bumps here and there, and she still needs some time to practice. And I think that's why it's ultimately decided in this sequence that, she's going to double down, figure out how to be the queen that she needs to be, and she's going to do it right here in Marine before they even decide to think about going back to Westeros.
Right. It lends a lot of credence to the idea that she as to her decision to stay in Marine, because she even says it's like, how am I supposed to take over Westeros if I can't even rule properly? And so she's going to stay in Marine. She's going to actually learn how to rule properly. She's going to extend her influence, as we come to see later on. You know, the ending is the ending, unfortunately, but it may have been a decision that did benefit her ultimately, as she did actually learn that power is more than just having a large army and conquering as many places as you can. You got to hold, like you've shown me so many times whenever we've played Risk, it's not just getting the territory, it's actually getting the territory and holding it until you can eventually outmaneuver your opponents. I feel like
Dom, that's a different podcast. We could talk Risk all night if you want.
All night, yeah.
Risk is about basically stockpiling your troops and eliminating the other person's troops and never putting yourself in a position where you have less troops than anybody else. Yes. And always attack, the strongest country on your borders if you could take that territory and get the card, because by weakening someone else and keeping their armies low, that's how you win the game of Risk. And that's kind of similar to the way that the Game of Thrones here is played.
Absolutely.
If you look at Tywin, he basically did all he can, to weaken the Starks one by one and basically chip away at their alliances, chip away at, any of their options. And it was just a matter of some smart cunning for him to orchestrate the Red Wedding that really was the tipping point and changed the war for him. So give me applause for that segue back to Game of Thrones. For the most part.
Hey, there we go. I mean, again, Professor Pat's Risk Hours. We should start that as a spin-off podcast.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to go. I don't think that has legs, but
I disagree. I disagree with you wholeheartedly. But
okay,
let's go to the.
Let's move on to the Eerie.
Let's go to the Eerie. This is where some shit goes down. Oh man,
I'm sorry.
How do we begin here?
It's just, the fact that it's almost like a comedy to me, this particular sequence, because they reveal that Littlefinger and Lysa have had this plot the entire show.
It's kind of hilarious that Littlefinger would trust somebody who's clearly as mentally unstable as Lysa, and the fact that, it does blend a little bit to Lysa's crazy antics all the way back in season 1. This is the first time we've seen these two, Lysa and baby Robin Aaron, or should I say 10-year-old Robin Aaron, who's still breastfeeding, however the hell old he is. And I think the kid actor was like 14 when they shot this. And so it kind of, I don't know, there's some plausible deniability and kind of, again, some more chinks in Littlefinger's plot where it's like, wow, Littlefinger has had this thing locked, fast, steady, this plot going for years now, and he's going to
reminds me
Lysa Aaron to carry out some very crucially important parts of it.
This reminds me of when I was like a really young kid, like 4 or 5 years old, and I was like, let's say a snow day, and I was like had to be babysat by like my grandparents, and they threw on or at least my grandmother threw on some soap opera. This reminds me of that type of reveal. Right? Like, it's just so shocking that Lysa, basically orchestrated her husband's death, orchestrated this whole plot to sort of like throw the Lannisters under the bus and consolidate power, and Lysa's throwing in her whole weight behind Littlefinger. It's just really bizarre, and it's it kind of makes sense. It kind of fits, and I think the her mental state is sort of at the center of this, because Littlefinger just basically there's no better way to put it. He seduced her, and she wasn't really, unfortunately, the sharpest tool in the shed. And, she was able to be manipulated by him into, killing her husband and basically going all in with such a schemer as Littlefinger. And, to me, like I said, it's just this like fantastic plot that, it's almost unimaginable, that it would take place. It's in your face, like, boom, here we are. Right. These events are happening just because we can make them happen, and it's going to stir the pot even more. It like I said, daytime soap opera. This is the closest the show, in my opinion, gets to it.
If anything, it almost has to, I feel like, by nature of the fact that it is so unbelievable, where she straight up is admitting to Littlefinger. It's like, we've loved each other from such a young age. You can clearly kind of see just one side. Again, more brilliant facial acting from Aidan Gillen, where he is just so clearly repulsed and so clearly like, okay, I'm just playing this out for as long as I possibly can, because he can see that she is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and she's just straight up admitting, it's like, yes, I put the wine, I put the poison in John Aaron's wine, and I wrote the letter to Kat telling her that the Lannisters were responsible, effectively jump-starting the entire game, and I'm like, what? I mean, I can only imagine what that would be like for a first-time viewer of the show who had never read any of the books going in, where they're having to fly. Again, we've sat through 3 seasons of slowly seeing the Starks get picked off by the Lannisters one by one, and now seeing that it has all come full circle with this conflict that ultimately had nothing to do with either family and only came from Littlefinger's attempts to seize power and Lysa's, as we come to Lysa's, as we come to find out, childhood love of Littlefinger. Is a little bit of backstory. They only really briefly hint at this in the books, but as they see here again, Catelyn Stark originally promised to Ned's older brother Brandon. Brandon obviously died, by the Mad King's hand. So then Catelyn ended up marrying. Catelyn ended up marrying Ned. And while Lysa was promised to Jon Arryn in order to solidify, obviously, Hoster Tully's, alliance with their upcoming rebellion. But Kat and Lysa, they had that little boyhood thing with Littlefinger growing up in River Run. Littlefinger obviously madly in love with Catelyn as well, and now he seems to have carried some of that over into Sansa, while Lysa madly in love with him. Feelings not at all reciprocated. So now Littlefinger is definitely taking advantage of a situation that has been quite literally years in the making. And poor Sansa is once again just stuck in the middle between the guy who was clearly manipulating her just to get something of his own and her batshit crazy aunt, who 1 minute seems all sort of nice and warm, and the next minute is threatening to slice her throat because of how she perceives, her perceived jealousy of Littlefinger.
Well, Sansa's younger, obviously has maintained, she's sort of still a young beauty, sort of growing into, her adulthood. And Lysa's, over the hill. I hate to say it that way, but
so many words.
Like, that's what she feels inside. And, so she's 100% jealous because also Sansa looks a lot like,
Catelyn.
her sister, Catelyn. And the fact is, she's clearly always been jealous of Catelyn, jealous of sort of this, representation of young Catelyn. And obviously, she's been hanging out with Littlefinger a lot longer than Lysa has. And, she just has this strange jealousy. She should have the confidence to not worry about it.
Right.
But,
she's alive and Catelyn's not.
Yeah, but even Sansa, like Sansa's just, a young girl, and, how possibly could Littlefinger just decide that he's going to throw away his whole attempt to get power, which relies on Lysa, and go with this younger version of her sister. It's her being very paranoid, and that's just part of her mental state, is like, don't trust anybody. But ultimately, I don't know, if she has this no trust of anybody type thing, how did she get wrapped up in this whole plot with Littlefinger? And it's there's really this is a unstable situation, and I think Littlefinger knows that. And I think that's with the episodes coming up ahead. I think that's why he makes some very effective decisions to really tie this, long-term scheme. He's going to basically wrap it up as a gift and, end it, at the end of the day.
As we see, yeah. And like I said, I will give Lysa credit in one instance. She does kind of scare Sansa into confirming her beliefs. And Sansa, again, uses some of her defense mechanisms that she used in King's Landing when she realizes, just because I'm out of King's Landing does not mean that the danger is over. Again, I feel like Lysa's almost pulling a Walter White there, where she's like, oh, you thought they were the danger. No, I'm the danger, And, and it does reveal some of Lysa's poor attempt at planning, which, as we see, will not come to pass at all. When she's like, it's interesting because it's a little bit of a retcon in the books where she says, okay, once the Lannisters kill Tyrion for murdering Joffrey, then, which again, I'm wondering how much of a hand she had in helping Littlefinger with Joffrey's death. Hopefully none. But whereas she's like, yeah, once they kill Tyrion, you'll be able to marry Robin. And that ultimately is Littlefinger's plan, because the whole thing in the books is, again, slightly different. But after Littlefinger kills Lysa in the books, Sansa basically spends the entire of A Feast for Crows having to deal with, the trial, them wondering if, the other Lords of the Vale, wondering if Littlefinger had anything to do with it. And then ultimately at the end, what's it called? Littlefinger kind of reveals his plan to because Littlefinger also has Sansa still disguised as his niece Elaine, which is something that Lysa does not know about in the books. Or she does rather, but she keeps it on the down low. And he reveals that after he kills Lysa, that he's going to marry Sansa to Robin and reveal her identity because he knows that Robin will be too sickly and weak to actually, hold down the title of the Vale. So he knows that he's like, look, when Robin dies, I'll reveal your identity, and then we'll rule Winterfell and the Eyrie together through your name. And that's kind of where we leave off with Sansa and Littlefinger in the book. We haven't seen anything new of them since then. So I think that's really interesting that we're kind of like already, again, this was already an indication of how fast the show was surpassing the books, where we were already at the point where a lot of the arcs in the show, in the books, kind of left off. So that was just another interesting point to bring up about the book. Also, one last hilarious bit. Sansa's face during Lysa's, screams of euphoria. Let's call it
euphoria, passion. I think
Perfect.
it's comedy, right? It's pretty much, Sansa's in the guest room and Littlefinger and Lysa are in the master bedroom, and they haven't seen each other in, years potentially. This whole plot has been kind of dragging on. And so, Lysa is someone that is, newly in love, or at least has been, in love the last few years with Littlefinger and this whole plot and everything. So the fact is, this is sort of like that long-awaited, reunion between the two of them. And Sansa, unfortunately, is just kind of stuck there, overhearing it from the guest bedroom. And it's just one of those things where it's like, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Like Sansa cannot escape, just like being, almost like tortured just by other people, and just like what their desires are. It's like she just wants to live in, sort of like, that dreamlike world, the perfect world, like that her character started off in. The whole idea that, oh, Joffrey's a prince and I want to marry a prince, and like princes are perfect. It's one of those things where, the character started off with that sort of, basically the blinders on, and that's the type of world she believed in. And, she continues time and time and time again to really see what the real world is. But yet she's not quite playing the game yet. She's not trying to get herself out of these situations or manipulate situations. She's not really, at that level quite yet. So unfortunately, she's still, that young woman who is in the guest room having to deal with what else is going on. She's not in control or have any real attempt to seize control at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. And I think that, again, talking about the comedy of this episode, I think that's a nice transition into our two brief check-ins that we have in the Riverlands before we get to, the ending thing with the wrap-up of the Night's Watchman north of the wall. But first we have what I like to call the beginning of the misadventures of Brienne and Podrick Payne, where Pod can't ride a horse, can't cook a rabbit,
like lighting the rabbit on fire and then stomping on
great.
it.
Oh, it was great.
It was fantastic.
It's great.
Like,
yeah. All
these
he can
scenes.
do is untire armor. That's about all he can do.
These scenes, it's fun because it's just comedic, and it's just, it reminds you that these characters that we've learned to love these two characters, and I think they're some of the best characters of the show. And these scenes here are almost like completely useless. It's just like, hey, they're starting their adventure. They're kind of, getting off to a little bit of a rough start. I think they're warming up to each other, but like that's about it. There's really nothing else going on in this particular sequence with Brienne and Podrick. And it's I'm fine with that. But again, we're gonna have to wait until we see how this storyline evolves in the next couple episodes.
Absolutely, yeah. But the one interesting bit does come from them, in between all the comedy. Brienne is like, I don't need a squire. I don't want you. You're only going to slow me down. The only reason why you're even with me is so that you could get out of the city safely. And he's like, Podrick kind of knows, like, yeah, I'm going to be dead if I'm not with someone. And he kind of understands that, even if he's only saying it in so many words. Like I said, Podrick Payne, again, inexperienced, but not stupid. I give him a lot of credit, and we see that at the end of the thing where it's like, and she's like, "Do you even know anything about combat?" And he kind of admits, like, "I killed a guy, you know." And she's like, "What?" She almost like does a double take there, and she's like, "How?" And she's like, "How did that happen?" And she's like, "I was protecting Tyrion on the during the Battle of the Blackwater, and I killed the Kingsguard." She's like, "How?" I love the reaction.
Well, it shows his loyalty to Tyrion, that he's willing to do whatever it takes to the person that he's serving with. And I think there's a little bit of respect that comes from Brienne hearing that story, and she believes it. You know, he has no reason to lie at this point to her. And, you know, I think the fact that he's that loyal and that trustworthy, I think that's really what resonates with her.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of loyal and trustworthy, we cut to our other scene in the Riverlands with just more comedy bits. Arya and the Hound continuing to make their trek towards the Eyrie.
Just with some dancing, you know?
The comedy here is on point. Like, oh man, I love the bit. Again, Arya's saying her list of names before she falls asleep. The Hound is basically telling her to shut the fuck up. He's like, look, shut up and get some sleep, you know? And she's like, I have to say my list of names. And they kind of have a little bit more of like, you know, just, you know, sociopath versus sociopath in the making kind of bonding, where she's like, evil's, you know, anger and rage at people's just as good a way, you know, to get to sleep, you know? And she's like, when she says his brother's name, she's like, maybe if you ever get a shot at your brother, maybe we'll both get to cross a name off their list, you know? Again, more mutual admiration, more kind of like sharing stuff with each other. And then he's like, well, you got to finish your list. May as well do it before you fall asleep. And she says, oh, just one. That you kind of, again, I love the back and forth that these two have, because every time the Hound is like taking shots at Arya takes shots right back at him, and vice versa. Like it's such a like, it really is like a buddy road adventure basically between the two of them. And again, all this extra time that we get to spend with them, which again, really is such a concentrated amount of time in the books. It really, I think, is something special, and in a strange way leads to, again, to be still one of the best parts about those problematic last couple episodes, in the moment where he tells her, you know, get out of the city, you know, don't become dead inside like me. I actually think that like that was one of the few like wholly original show moments that like was actually earned. But it leads to the next morning when he catches her with the water dancing, and he's like, oh really? What do you call? He's like, is that supposed to be training and fighting? She's like, no, it's dancing. And then they kind of like, again, have another one of their back and forths that they've been having that he's slowly been teaching her throughout the entirety of this season, where he's like, honor and glory and skill, none of that means shit if you're dead. You know, it's like, you gotta have, he's like, you want to know why your dancing master lost to Marentrant? Because he didn't have his sword and he didn't have armor ultimately, you know, when Arya is trying to once again say, hey, you know, it was, you know, but he would have if this happened. And the Hound's kind of like says to her, like, woulda, coulda, shoulda. No such thing. In this world, you live or you die. And that's all that there is to it, you know? And like she tries to poke him in the armor, and he knocks her out, you know? Again, just more life lessons. I feel like they should have entitled this entire section of the show like Life Lessons with Arya and the Hound, you know?
Yeah, no, I think the whole, and I love the acting though. The dancing moves were sort of well choreographed. It kind of was believable that someone taught her these things, and also, believable that it's just her making it up, you know, and dancing, you know. So it's one of those things where I feel like where it came from, and just giving the Hound something to criticize her with, I think it was well done and perfect. And, you know, the fact is, again, the Hound knocks her right onto the ground, takes the needle away from her, and, you know, proves his point that, you know, it's like, Marentrant just had a bigger sword, you know, and that was the case, you know.
Or in this case,
sometimes that wins battles.
Or in this case, you know, a sword, because as we remember all the way back to season 1, poor Serial only had those 2 wooden sparring swords with him, you know. Little bit underprepared, you know, a dancing master, the first sword of Bravos. I don't know. I don't want to ever take away from, like, you know, the honorable characters of the show, but there's a reason why all the honorable characters are, you know, dead, and all the unhonorable characters are, you know, alive, as the Hound consistently points out. So it's like, the Hound might have a couple points here, you know, just as far as like, maybe you don't want to go into that super unprepared.
I think, you know, there's a reason why the unhonorable characters, you know, sort of get the advantage, at least for a few episodes before they get, you know, their untimely demise. But for the most part, you're right. You know, it's one of those things where the game is cruel, and if you're not really careful, you're not really aware of what's going on, the reality between the lines, that's when you get sloppy. That's when you become a Joffrey and you're really just you're not playing the game. You're just making rash decisions, pouring wine all over your uncle, and coming up with these offensive plays that no one but Tommen likes. It's like you just don't care. You're flaunting your power in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And in the Game of Thrones, like everybody wants that chair. So you flaunting your power and showing that you don't deserve any respect or anything really puts you in a dangerous position. And I think that's one of the things that we can learn from this show when we watch it and kind of look at it. It's like, who's really not paying attention to the details, who's really not doing what they should to protect themselves and the people that are around them. They clearly always reached their untimely demise.
Absolutely. Well, who also was not paying attention to their surroundings and reached their untimely demise in this episode?
Oh man, is it Locke here?
It is Locke. Indeed.
Not to be confused with John Locke the philosopher.
John Locke the philosopher, exactly. I mean, again, we talked about it last episode. This sequence that happens north of the wall, it's awesome. It's a great action sequence. Again, we're building off of the amazing setup from last week. Again, Locke, not a great plan. Again, we talked about it last week. Again, just the logistics of his plan. So he's going to take this crippled kid who has grown quite significantly since that first season. He's like basically a teenager now. He's going to drag this prepubescent, this teenage kid who can't walk, however many leagues it is from Crassus to the wall, somehow make it through the wall, get past the Night's Watch. And then even if he makes it past the Night's Watch somehow without losing his head, he's got treks upon treks of miles of wildling forces, of wildling, infested land to get through before he even makes it to Winterfell to Dreadfort. So, not a great plan here, just logistically.
Yeah, no, I can concur with you, but Jon Snow does compliment him on, oh man, you are silent.
You are silent. You're a good tracker.
Yeah, he comes out of the woods and he almost scares Jon and the rest of the brothers. And I think it's one of those things where he does have a very particular set of skills, right? As they would say for Talkin,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But John Locke, his days are numbered. This episode is his plan, like you said, is just really bizarre. At the end of the day, you're in enemy territory. There's wildlings around you. There's White Walkers. There's the Night's Watch. All you really needed to do, they were all tied up. Just take care of them all. Right. You could have easily just killed them all and then gone back and be like, hey, Lord Bolton, I took care of Bran. And that's all that they really needed. Right. Did they really need him alive? I don't think. Yeah. It's that wasn't really
just from the Bolton standpoint. It would have made way more sense for them to kill Bran rather than keep him alive.
Yeah, I understand that they like to torture people and put them in
just from a practical
chains and everything.
But man, it's you're in the wilderness. There are wildlings. There are White Walkers, and there are Night's Watch members. Come on, man! The time for torture is later,
Yeah, I think, Locke was being very optimistic that he would be able to carry Bran all the way back down. But
boy, did it not work out for him.
Yeah, so, he couldn't really predict that Bran would control Odor and come in
Bran could warg. He didn't realize he was dealing with a warg.
Exactly. So, at the end of the day, I think Locke is a very interesting character in the show because he's definitely a secondary character. He kind of pops up and maims Jaime, and then he sort of lingers in the background. And even in this sequence where he joins the Night's Watch looking for Bran, it's sort of in the background, a very secondary character. And to me, like I said last time,
so much so that you almost forgot that he was working with the Boltons.
Yeah, I thought he was a brand new character almost. It just feels that way. Here he is in a new setting. He has a new identity. He's doing, new things. And it's just so easy to forget where this character came from because he doesn't really get a lot of screen time. He's very efficient in terms of how they utilize him in the show. So, I think he's a very good character to have. And his untimely demise is sort of just that. It sort of just ends that storyline, which, really feels like it should have
really
gone
feels
somewhere
kind of
more.
half-baked. Feels like it was, building somewhere. It definitely felt like the definition of, okay, we got to get this shit out of the way. We got too many other things. Because, again, this is a pretty significant wrap-up point, because this is the last time we see Bran before the finale. Again, obviously, we have everything that Ramsay and Theon are doing, getting the Ironborn out of the rest of the North. Obviously, Jon and the rest of the Night's Watch still have to prep for the Wildling invasion after they finish this up.
Yeah.
Like I said, this, to me, is like the section that feels like the midpoint of the episode.
To be honest, I think the only thing that the Locke storyline really serves the show is that the Boltons are willing to send out troops and go through a lot of hoops to really find, Brandon or Rickon Stark. And so it puts in the viewer's mind, like, they're going to keep trying. They're going to keep doing this as long as it takes to find these two. So later on, when they finally do capture Rickon. Yeah, basically it's one of those things where it's believable. And I think the Locke storyline here really does plant the seed, which leads to it being pretty believable later on that, the younger brother is caught.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So obviously, then we have Carl Tannen briefly with his encounter with Bran and them, and also, again, I also wrote down here much more foreshadowing. When we see Bran and Mira and Jojen. Jojen again. I feel like all that Jojen's role this entire season was just basically saying, "Yeah, I'm gonna die. Yeah, I'm gonna die."
Yeah. Well, and he's coughing and he needs water. He's pretty
wheezing,
much like sickly in prison.
He looks like a walking corpse. He's basically like, he's really not doing well. He's on the end of his rope. Again, like I said, talked about this last week, where it almost feels like as Bran is getting closer and closer to becoming the Three-Eyed Raven, Jojen is becoming more and more drained. As he again, it's really weird how he has like these Dr. Manhattan visions as far as like how he knows exactly like how and when he's gonna die. I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty big burden to rest on your shoulders. Like, it's always really fascinating whenever they have those characters in fiction, like Jojen, like Dr. Manhattan, where they know, because they can see the future, they know exactly when and where they are going to meet their demise, And so, like, I definitely think that, like, in hindsight, obviously, it seems like he's laying it on a little thick. But again, watching this week to week in the moment, because in the books, Jojen is still alive and well. He did not die at all. So it's really fascinating to still watch this in hindsight. Obviously, Carl comes in, starts to make an attempt at Mira. And then Jojen basically tells him, you're going to die,
Well, I think the beauty of this sequence is the fact that they show the tree that they're traveling towards.
Right.
And it's a pretty cool shot because the hut disappears behind Bran, and the tree is behind him, and they're only, so far away from it. So it gives us, the viewer, the sense that they're really close to their journey, and whatever happens here tonight, if they happen to die, they came so close to their objective. So there's a lot of cool visual things going on in this sequence. Like his hand on fire and stuff like that. So a lot of the magic that the Three-Eyed Raven storyline really represents is presented here in this sequence before the fireworks start to pop off. And the fact is, the whole, I see the future, and I see your future, which is death. And I think Carl, the character, is basically thinking about it, and he doesn't really have too much time to react and get angry and sort of strike at him. He basically says, imagine what I'm going to do to your sister. Imagine what these other fellas in the room are going to do, and keep your eyes open. And then immediately,
the Night's Watch come
the Night's
in.
Watch
wow,
have
talk
come.
about timing right there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where Carl doesn't actually get to torture this group any more than he already has.
Right.
Immediately they're in a sword fight, which basically takes their whole attention.
Quick. It also goes by relatively quickly because it shows, again, these guys never had a plan. They were not equipped. There's a reason why. Again, they were all cowards. They were not, aside from Carl, they were not good fighters. The Night's Watch takes them out with relatively quickly.
Locke scouted the whole thing first and comes back. That's when he gets his compliment from Jon. And for the most part, he just says they're not even watching. Like, they have no sentries, they have no nothing. They're basically just kind of doing their own thing. So this should be a breeze. And, for the most part, it's pretty easy. They just show up, they start killing everybody. It's really John's fight with Carl that is the major opposition.
And it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a great fight because Carl's right. He finally gets to show that, he fought in the gutters of King's Landing or in the bars or whatever. And, that he doesn't really fight with honor. And he makes this whole thing about, growing up in a castle and learning how to parry and the right way to fight. Yeah. But in the real world,
very different styles of fighting because, again, in the real world, it doesn't matter if you know how to fight. It matters if you can fight to win, as he said.
Exactly. And, I think this is a good lesson for John because, hey, it's like he wasn't winning by any means.
Right.
He was cut. He's fighting Carl with the 2 daggers. So Carl got the best of him. And he almost had him until basically one of Craster's daughters/wives, goes ahead and stabs Carl in the back. And as he turns his attention to deal with her, that's when Jon Snow.
John gets a final blow.
Yeah, he does. I don't know. This is one of those moments where Game of Thrones goes full disgusting death sequence.
I don't know. Does this get the record for the most ridiculously gory, but just for the purpose of wow, we just really wanted to see what it would be like if a sword went through someone's face. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hey, listen, it's you got to do what you got to do to win the fight. And I think John learned his lesson, I guess.
Definitely.
Just go through the back of the skull through the mouth.
Great effect, by the way, too.
I think it's I will say it's probably one of those things where they were emboldened to really go for it and really end this sequence and this storyline with a major effect like that. It's a little brutal. It's a little. It's a little brutal. I should say it's a lot brutal.
Yeah, it's a little.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it's this puts a cap on the sequence, and it does it in a way that I don't think could have happened in season 3 or before.
I agree.
I think they have the budget this season. Everything's firing on full cylinders. They have. They could do exactly what they want to do. And I think this is a little bit of a flex moment where it's hey, we have this character. He's kind of ruthless. He's kind of evil. And we want to visualize him getting his just desserts. And, I think this point on for the rest of the show, that's definitely one of the things that they try to do for any of the evil characters that they have is make sure that their deaths are just as horrific as the trauma that they cause the so-called good characters.
Absolutely, yeah. Now that we've gotten past the first 3 seasons, which was all about kind of solidifying how evil constantly has its way, now we're finally seeing it's the evildoers are just as culpable as the good guys. As we see later on in the episode when Rast tries to make his untimely escape from there, and he gets eaten by Ghost again. He said it last episode. He was 100% right. They should not have kept him alive. Jon is finally reunited with Ghost. Also, again, another one who, again, suffers, from those consequences. Locke, when Bran wargs into Hodor and reveals what happened if Hodor wasn't, mentally handicapped. And literally, I don't even know if that's could be considered breaking his neck. He literally almost rips his head off. There's tendons and bone showing. It's kind of insane how he pulls it off. That was the only effect that I thought was a little hokey and gimmicky. And unfortunately, Bran does, again, there's a brief chance for Bran to be reunited with Jon, but unfortunately it doesn't happen because as Jojen says, look, if we say anything, he's going to try and stop us here. And it ends with, I think, again, a very poetic way to, cap off the midpoint of the season where, again, this ultimate signal of all this pain, all these years of misery and torture for these wives, this place where they were enslaved. And they're we're not going with you because we're not trying to be slaves of the wall, burn, but we're not staying here. Burn this place to the mother effing ground. And it's exactly what they do. It's a beautiful, haunting imagery. It just sucks because if those wives stayed north of the wall, they definitely ended up marching on Winterfell in the final
it's a really weird end credits music choice too. Basically the roof is on fire. I'm joking, but
the roof is on fire.
Yeah, whatever that song is, but no, I think it's definitely the right thing to do. It's a nice sort of endpoint to the Craster storyline. You have to get it out of the way. You have to burn that keep down because now it's between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings And ultimately, once that gets resolved at the end of this season, you know, it opens it up for the White Walkers, which is sort of introduced as the be-all, end-all evil in the next season. We finally, we're, you know, basically a season away from one of the best episodes made in the show, which really ups the ante for the White Walkers. So, you know, I think here is, again, it's sort of the end of you know, an era, which is the whole trip above the wall and sort of, you know, meeting you know, Mance Rayder and everybody, and now we're only a few more episodes away from the exciting sort of conclusion of this particular storyline.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's still a good episode again, but like we said, a lot of cooldown, you know, ended with a dope action sequence, but again, this was just warm up. This was just warm up. Again, the next 5 episodes, again, banger after banger after banger. We'll be back next week for season 4, episode 6, The Laws of Gods and Men. Oh man, just another reason why I love this season so much. Like 4 to me of like the best episodes of the whole show all come in this season. So yeah, it's going to be nonstop. So you guys are definitely not going to want to miss the next couple weeks of our recap show for this as we cover the back half of season 4. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. Pat, where can the good people find you?
Hey, listen, at this moment, you can find me here at Talkin TV, Talking Thrones with Dom. And, you know, hey, I do have a social media account on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. So if you want to follow there and, you know, take a look at the few photos I have, and maybe one day you'll see another post from me, you know, sometime in the future. You know.
Maybe until that day comes, you can of course find Pat right here on the Talkin TV podcast, Talkin TV YouTube channel. Make sure you guys click the like button and the subscribe button if you're listening to this on Spotify. Make sure you go back and listen to all the rest of our episodes we put up. We put up a lot of episodes on the Spotify feed in the last couple of years. And make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms at official Talkin TV podcast or at Talkin TV podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Serialized, and of course be sure to follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all social media platforms. We'll be back next week for Tyrion's trial. But in the meantime, stay frosty, people, and watch more fucking movies.